I guess we're going to get started. My name is Bob Donaldson. This is Jessica Rathke.
Hi.
And we each run our own sort of independent consulting company now. I'm focusing more on technology, strategy, and process. Jessica focuses on sales and marketing. So we might actually be a pretty good pair for this. And we actually did this once.
Yes, we did. More than once, actually.
But we worked together at a translation company in Austin, Texas some time ago. So we're back on the same team here, and we'll share some of our insights, such as they are, and horror stories with you.
And some good stories as well.
So why don't you tell them what we're trying to do?
Right. Okay. Today, the goals of our presentation today are threefold. We're going to talk about the sources of conflict between, in general, project management organizations and sales organizations. I think we'd like to focus on the healthy part of it, but sometimes it devolves into unhealthy conflict, so we'll investigate that. Then we'll talk about ways to turn this conflict into cooperation, and we'll start by identifying some of the common barriers to cooperation, and then we'll start getting into some examples, so some sort of mini case studies in areas where things have gone wrong, and we're assigning dollar values to that, so the impact will be pretty apparent. And then we'll talk about fostering mutual trust between the two organizations, and then we'll give some examples about the power of collaboration and provide examples for that as well with some dollar values, and then we'll do a larger case study that both Bob and I worked on at one time.
So when we talk about that power of collaboration, we want to set a little bit of a context here. One of the first things that happens in a growing organization is the beginning of a division of responsibility, and the first one is typically between the people who make promises, also known as salespeople, and the people who are stuck keeping them, also known as delivery or operations or project management. And so there is an implied tension between those that actually is healthy. It keeps an organization healthy, growing, profitable, and so forth. If that tension becomes conflict, if that tension becomes superior subordinate kind of a relationship, then it can really cause a problem for both of those things, both growth and profit. So we'll talk about that some.
Right. So next we'll talk about the sources of conflict, and I will make a start on saying that really for us salespeople, we just find the focus on cost just a lot to deal with. We understand that there are costs, but we have a lot of pressures out there, being salespeople, and we really, we're under pressure. We have to negotiate price, and sometimes the inflexibility inside on cost just causes us all kinds of problems.
But, you can actually sell things on something other than lower price, Jessica.
Well,
and we do have to maintain our margins on the delivery.
Well, I understand that, but we also have our own pressures. And the other thing is I hear over and over and over that we have to reach our bonuses. We want to get our bonuses for the month, so we get judged on cost. That's right. What I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. But after all, you get your bonus whether we make a profit or not when you get your sales commission. So,
well, I guess we're going to have to agree to disagree in that regard. However, there are times when processes internally are just too inflexible, and I can't force my clients into a process that doesn't fit their project.
Right, but it does take us a while to develop these processes, and the processes are the things that keep us profitable in the long run because we're able to do things efficiently. And sometimes if we get a little bit more advance notice, if we got us involved in some of the bidding, then we might be more able to suggest the appropriate process solution.
Well, I have called on occasion, and I've had trouble getting some of that information out of you guys. And really, whenever I try to explain what the customer is going through and some of their business objectives, I find it's just kind of sometimes falls on dead ears, and I do my best to convey that to your organization, but at the same time, we really need to focus on the customer in that respect.
Well, when you've seen one customer, you've seen them all. And I think that we really, some of these customers are just unreasonable.
Sometimes customers can be unreasonable, but at the same time, I think it's my job to help your organization understand what the customer really needs, and we have to try to meet those objectives for them.
Well, that actually sounds like a good idea. The problem, of course, is that you never have
listen.
time to talk to me.
No, you don't have time to talk to me either.
All right, so maybe that'll set the context. You know, there are all sorts of barriers to cooperation, and how many of you have seen one or more of these barriers that we threw up here for your consideration? How many of you experienced all that? There's a few here. How many of you are paying attention? Okay, a few people there.
Have any of you experienced other things?
How many people are tweeting something?
Yeah. How many of you have experience with other things? Do you have anything to share other than these issues? Have there been other ones?
We'd really like to throw it open and get your perspective on some of the things you've seen in your organizations or maybe other organizations so that we can keep this neutral that are barriers to cooperation.
Anybody?
So executive management can actually create a situation that discourages collaboration and communication between the silos. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm on the sales side, and the main issue is always bringing you a new project or a new customer. The reaction is always, "Oh my God, don't do it," or whatever. It's always the negative,
mm-hmm.
or they say, we don't want this. We are not prepared."
So how many of you salespeople have experienced that kind of pushback from delivery? We don't want that new process, that new project. That,
mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. Others?
Okay.
Oh, we got a live crowd here. We can add those extra 4 slides.
Okay. Well, go for it then.
We'll go on here.
Okay, what I'm going to do now is just give a couple of mini sort of case studies based on my experience in this, projects that have been lost or clients that have been lost as a result of non-cooperation between sales and project management or production, I guess I should say. And these are very real. They happened, all of them happened either to me or in an organization in which I worked. The first one is a couple of projects that were lost because we had some serious pushback from operations in terms of technology that we supported. And this kind of goes to that management issue where sales was given a task to go out and win new business in a new vertical market. But that meant acquiring new technology. Unfortunately, the project management organization was wholly unaware of this. And so when we came in with opportunities and files to analyze, we couldn't even analyze them because we didn't have the technology to do so. So, you know, in the end, we did kind of push those things through, but unfortunately our response time was rather slow and our competitors beat us to it. And so we lost those 2 opportunities of $225,000 and $85,000. But it isn't always production. Sales does a great job sometimes of overselling. And this particular one was a really huge client, and it was a software localization project. Unfortunately, the salesperson probably wasn't meeting their revenue targets and did a bit of creative selling and promised a lot that really couldn't be delivered, and it was thrown over the wall. They washed their hands of it. It was like the grenade over the wall, and production had to try to sort it out. Unfortunately, it just wasn't possible, and it created all kinds of problems, both internally and certainly an unhappy client. And another example, I'll skip down to the bottom one just to, in the interest of time, but this was another one where it was $125,000 opportunity. This client had never done localization before, so as we know, sometimes they just don't know exactly what to provide. And we ended up with some pretty messy files. It wasn't very pretty, and I had project management just say we refuse to analyze these. And I thought, well, okay, can't we have a conversation with the client if it's that bad, and we can try to work together on this? But again, there was so much back and forth and argument over this that, again, we finally got it done, but too late, really, to win the business. So it was a real shame. Yes? These are from These are... Yeah, it's difficult to say because these are examples from a 20-year career, and I've kind of picked and choose ones from different companies.
Yeah. Well,
that was actually about a $7 million a year company, so it was a pretty significant loss.
I think the thing to remember here is that it's the kind of revenue that's pretty significant in any organization. It may be too big for some organizations, so it doesn't apply there. But even Lionbridge would rather not lose $1 million a year client, right? Curry, did you have a comment or a question too earlier?
No, it's similar. I mean, you take the first one, for example.
Yes.
And it seems that, so if you're selling that, why did you sell it?
Because I was mandated to do so. And it was an example of senior management had not communicated this, or I'm not actually sure, or it was a sales manager who decided to do something and pursue business in one area, and project management was completely unaware. It is true, actually.
And I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but actually that's a good thing. So I appreciate the question. What I would suggest to you is that one of the takeaways we hope you go with here is the responsibility of senior management to set reasonable goals that all people can go with. Because if everybody does what seems right to them at the time, then, I mean, how can it not be right for a salesperson to close a sale, right? How can it not be right for an operations person to control expenses? Well, it actually turns out that those things can both be wrong if they're not reading from the same sheet of music, if they're not really following the same directions that are set from above. And if no direction is set from above, that's what you'll get. You'll get no direction.
I think that's where you're probably going with this as well, because the whole communication piece and the whole strategic integrating all the different departments.
Right. Right. So when it comes to fostering this collaboration, the key thing really that everyone needs to remember is that sales is everybody's job. It's everybody's job all the time. If your title doesn't have sales in it, then either that's an oversight or more likely it's just that your primary responsibility is not for closing those sales. But if you don't operate in support of sales, directly or indirectly, then you're not really helping push the company forward. And by the way, you're hearing this from a guy who's never been in sales, okay? But it's so important to keep your eye on the customer. It's so important to understand that the way you respond to a quote request, the way you respond to a file analysis request, the way you manage the project, the way you are concerned with quality, as well as your availability to answer the salesperson's questions or to get on the telephone with the customer. All that is part of your job. And that's how you start with the collaboration. By the same token, it really is important to have synchronized goals and incentives. If the salesperson is only incented to close business without regard to whether it's actually a promise that anybody can keep, then they can get very creative at making promises, right? I mean, if they can close a deal in 5 minutes by dropping 20% off the price, or they can argue with you again on the phone one more time about why you need to be responsive to the customer's needs, they'll just drop the price and let you deal with it. And by the same token, from the delivery side, if we're always complaining about the cost, if the only job we're willing to do is the one that people wanted last year, we're never going to be able to deal with next year's growth opportunity. Kerry?
So just a question on the three first bullets. How do you structure it? If you have the customer and you have the account manager talking to the customer, or the PM talking to the customer on about this, opportunities for cross-sell, upsell, great things. They hear about projects coming in. But then you have a bigger project coming in, so you get sales involved, because that's probably working on a different project. And how do you then synchronize the incentives and the compensation plan so that it actually works? Because that's going to get pretty tricky.
Right. Curry's just observing that this bullet point is not as simple as it looks. That synchronizing those things, especially in a larger organization where you've got project management and account managers handling repeat business, and then maybe a large new opportunity that the salespeople get involved in, it can be challenging. And I think that there are too many variables in terms of different sizes organizations for us to say, here's how you do that, or here's even a list of examples. But the important thing I think we're trying to say is that the fact that it's a hard problem is not a good excuse to ignore the problem. In your context, you have to deal with it, and you have to be alert for the symptoms that you haven't dealt with it effectively.
Yeah, sometimes, at least in my experience, it's come down to how empowered the employees are. In a couple of organizations I've worked in, the project management team in particular were not as empowered as they might have been to actually have a sensible conversation with me, so that we could arrive at something that made sense for the company and for both our goals, because obviously cost containment is a big issue for production, but also, you know, conversely, we want to meet the needs of the market and the customer, and there has to be a happy, you know, meeting of the two. And I think if, you know, most of us are fairly reasonable people, and I think if sales and production are brought together, we're going to talk about a couple of ways actually in a second, or Bob is, but if we're brought together to have conversations about this and maybe coached by our managers a bit, I think we can arrive at these things in a sensible way without all sorts of rules and what have you, because they'll just be broken anyway, I think.
Right. And I think one of the things we need to recognize is that in our business traditionally, project management has included an awful large component of file management or data management. And that's fine if you want to give file management and data management responsibilities to somebody, but we ought to admit that that's not project management. And so for there to be effective synchronization of goals, there needs to be sort of a parity in terms of level of responsibility and opportunity to influence the company between the project management or production side and the sales side. If sales is overawing production and production never gets to throw anything in, then no wonder they sell just on price and we have problems making a profit. If, on the other hand, production gets so much in charge that, you know, they've got veto power against any new sales proposal because it doesn't meet margins and so forth, you won't have the growth problem. You'll have other problems, but you won't have a problem dealing with growth. Yeah. And so there really needs to be doing that. So.
Oh, you want me to talk about cross-departmental training?
Yeah, I've been talking too much.
Oh, all right. Happy to. Cross-departmental, actually, this is something near and dear to my heart because on both sides of the coin, I've experienced some really fantastic training. In one company, I had to shadow project management and actually manage projects myself. That was part of my training. So I was brought to headquarters. I worked remotely. I was brought to headquarters for 3 weeks, and that was part of my training. So for a half a day, every couple of days, I was either spending time with a project manager or actually having them coach me in terms of managing a project. So it gave me a fair bit of insight in terms of, you know, the translator that goes AWOL, you know, issues from other production managers, DTP or engineering. And so I really gained a tremendous appreciation for what it takes to actually get a job done. Conversely, at another organization, we actually had customer-centric selling courses, and it was naturally for salespeople, but we actually included our senior project managers in that as well. And part of that training was followed up by having production people actually accompany the sales team on calls. And it really did. I mean, there was one situation where a customer, we went in and the VP swooped in and said, you have 10 minutes to tell me why we should pick your company over others. And I handled the question, but when we got out, the project manager went, oh my God. That was really difficult. It was a very high pressure situation. So in both those instances, we got a fair bit of mutual understanding and certainly a lot more respect for one another. Yeah. And I think it really did even out that chasm that can sometimes develop between the two.
Yeah, and I think that's really key. Dilbert's manager has a number of really witty sayings, and one of them is this one at the bottom: anything I don't understand is easy. And we need to recognize that that we fall into that trap very easily. And so doing that kind of cross-training that provides some mutual respect for how hard the other person's job is really helpful. And then that drives communication.
Yes,
I do a lot of project management training, and one of the things I say there is that communication problems are at the root of every problem project and every project problem.
Well, I don't have anything quite that clever, but when I'm doing sales training, I actually make sure that the salespeople, particularly new ones to the industry, understand that project managers are their best friends, really, and they're the people who get the work done, and building a relationship with them is very important.
So how do we collaborate on this stuff then?
Well, I think the power of collaboration has so many benefits. We've got 4 categories here. I think we could probably come up with 10 or 20. But it certainly gives a competitive advantage in the marketplace, because if I, as a salesperson, am going to production to ask really good questions and solicit their input for a sizable project, we can actually come up with a much more powerful proposal and quote, very compelling, that I could never possibly do on my own. And I think that increases the client's confidence in the company. I think clients can tell when there's a high level of collaboration, and they can certainly see the result in a smart proposal, in a really well-crafted one that's insightful and can solve some of their business problems. And I think it's especially important today in the value-based environment that we're selling. I mean, we are commoditized, but we still have to prove our value to customers. And what better way from the people I rely on to do the work, who can spot a problem in files that they're analyzing that I wouldn't even look at. So.
Yeah, and that kind of thing then really gives me and the project management organization an opportunity to be successful, because we've got that insight up front. We can do a better job of influencing the negotiations and helping the sales team and the client understand the special considerations for this project that might make it more expensive than some typical project. We end up not just burning through customers. I mean, it may be that you're not a good fit with a customer. Let's identify that early in the conversation instead of after we lost money on the first $100,000 project. You know, it allows us to be more profitable, because I can begin to see the future demand for investing in new technology and use that as an opportunity. And then obviously, if we've built that kind of case, then we have repeat business, and it's the lifetime value of the customer that's really most important anyway.
Yeah, and building on that, if we have closer relationships with our clients, they're much more inclined to give us referrals, probably that will come through project management, as you said, Kari, rather than sales. A lot of times that gets shared with project managers, and if there's a good relationship between the two, then we can work together to handle those. Long-term contracts and just more vendor-client cooperation. So when we're working together, we can actually proactively solve problems on behalf of our clients and keep them with us longer.
And we can proactively contribute then also to our own company's strategy, because we're able to respond more quickly to market changes, because we have not only the insight from the sales team that's out there talking to people, but the project management team is involved as well in understanding what's involved in actually meeting this new type of demand. We're more responsible not only to individual customers, but to customer demand in general. We're more responsible to the growing trends in the industry. And so as we can influence senior management, they can begin to make informed decisions about investment and return on investment instead of just saying no.
Okay, just a couple of case studies here based on my experience. Again, these are all real, and these are successes, in my view, by a high level of cooperation between project management and sales. The first one I love because I've already kind of referred to this one, but it was a huge client, and they were acquiring another company. The project manager got wind of this, asked some really smart questions about is there any additional business? It came back to me, and so I was able to meet with this other company, and we closed the business. If he hadn't passed that to me, it probably wouldn't have happened. In another situation, we won some business that was a bit outside our capabilities, and it was we needed to get a particular tool to actually analyze the files, but we didn't. We had a new version that couldn't be used retroactively on older versions, and I found a tool online, so I passed that along to. It was a free version of it actually online, and passed that along to production, and we ended up closing that business. So I'll leave it at that for now. We have a much bigger case study to review with you, and I think that one exemplifies most of these things. But again, the bottom line can be really impacted.
So let's tell us about this. Tell you a little bit about this interesting project that we worked on together at a nameless translation company in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, there were a lot of challenges actually with this project, and the key ones from a sales perspective were it's a very well-known client. Of course, PricewaterhouseCoopers is very well known. They were tasked with bringing their audit management software to market, so it suddenly became a tool that they used internally that they were actually selling out in the marketplace, and it was. Bob will tell you about some of the serious challenges from a production standpoint. For me, it was new business for our company, and I had been tasked with selling localization services, and so there was a learning curve there, and there were a lot of issues surrounding that in terms of our capabilities. And then there was definitely a non-negotiable timeline that was set not by my contact, but his management, and he had a lot to prove actually, because there was a lot of skepticism about our ability to deliver that, and also things had been done sort of in country before, and they were trying to consolidate this so that it was actually more manageable. So I'll turn over the production part to Bob.
Yeah, and when I got responsibility for this project, I think I got it on about my third day of employment, and it was also my third day of being back in the language industry after a very long absence. So I didn't really know that I wasn't supposed to ask questions, so I went and asked questions. And discovered that, among other things, the client was trying to make an internal case for centralizing localization, and their value proposition was, we can deliver all of our languages on time in the same version, which was clearly not the case in what we were delivered. Mm-hmm. So we had 8 languages, and the first thing we had to do is we had to justify purchase of a new tool, and it was not a huge project, although it turned out to be a huge client over time. So we had to justify the purchase of a new tool, which we managed to do. Again, I think if I'd had any experience, I wouldn't have even asked, but we did that. We had to deal with legacy language issues. The system had been completely decentralized, and our client wasn't even aware of how bad the translation was. It was pretty clear in retrospect, for instance, that the Russian version was a machine translation. You know, they had a place where you could break the process and resume. Well, the word resume was translated resume in Russian. So, and stuff like that everywhere. And so we had to manage all that, all knowing that first of all, there was an installed user base that was using this stuff already. So the users were clearly able to deal with whatever problems were in place. Mm-hmm. And then second, our client wasn't going to be around to give us the follow-on work if we didn't meet the deadline. It didn't matter what else was true about the project. So we had to manage it, we had to move that around, change what we were going to do less in some languages, more in others. We had to manage our vendor concerns. Well, it's too bad that the customer doesn't care about quality. Says, you don't understand. The customer's not going to be there if we don't deliver on May 3rd or whatever day it was. So, but we worked through those things, and again, there was almost continuous communication between Jessica and myself during the course of that. We were both in contact with a customer as we ran into problems, helping them understand why it was that we were going to have to give them this unpleasant choice between 2 options. If we were going to meet
had
the
some
deadline.
pretty long conference calls.
Yeah, but it was all good at the end. We delivered all 8 languages on time. The localization department made their case and became the centralized go-to place for PricewaterhouseCoopers for not just the Team 8 project, but for other localization projects. Mm-hmm. Our company won a long-term contract to do that work, including, by the way, one of the first things we gave them was a long list of stuff from our vendors that had to be fixed in their current environment, in their current languages. Mm-hmm. And so we got the language quality assurance, cleaning up the translation memory problem, and so forth and so on. So it really worked out well.
And I have to say on that last point, that was kind of a tough sell because it was additional costs that the client didn't anticipate paying, and we really did have to make a lot of justification in terms of correcting the quality and bringing everything, well, not everything, but some languages were pretty bad, and we had to bring those up. But it did come at cost, so we had to do some prioritization and really work together with our vendors as well to make sure that happened in a timely but also cost-effective way.
Yeah, and I think it certainly made an impression on me as a project I was able to contribute to and help. I'm sure it's one that Jessica remembers. Yeah. The company did very well for it. It was an important entree into what, for the company at that time, was sort of a new business area, software localization. And our client, not just our direct client, the localization department, but PricewaterhouseCoopers did very well out of it because they ended up selling that whole division to
Wolters Kluwer, yeah.
And one of their selling points in selling off that whole division was a well-organized multi-language release schedule and a well-organized localization system. So that was our direct client who did some of that work, not us. But it's the power of collaboration along the way. So I don't know if we have much time for questions. We probably have a little. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.